All right, hi everyone, and welcome to part six, if you can believe it, of Plato's Gorgias reading. This will be the last recording for this reading. So it's been a bit of a marathon one, but you have to keep in mind it is presenting two perspectives on the good life. So always remember if an exam question or something like that asks for the philosophy presented in Plato's Gorgias, you have to talk about both Socrates and Callicles in your answer. Okay, so just fair warning. But this section, what we're going to see is Callicles unfortunately pretty much giving up the fight, and he resorts to ad hominem attacks, so just sort of calling Socrates stupid and childish and that sort of thing. And he stops actually trying to argue against him. Socrates then soldiers on by himself and basically fills in the gaps that should have been filled by Callicles at the request of other people in the audience, like Gorgias, who want to hear the argument completed to its conclusion. Um, but in this section, we don't necessarily get a whole lot that's new. Right towards the end, we get a little bit of new information, and we actually get a good point to criticize now that we know a lot more about things than the ancient Greeks did, and I'll get to that later. But what we do get is a pretty good summary of the argument, like thus far. So um, we're going from, what are we going from? So 505C, the italicized part at the start there. I'll flick over to the next slide. And what I've done is I've basically presented the summary that Socrates is about to give in dot points in sort of the order that he presents it as we're going along. Okay. So highlighters at the ready, and here we go. Faced with defeat, Callicles resorts once more to sullen abuse. Socrates continues the argument alone. The good life and human happiness depends crucially, he argues, on self-discipline. In fact, the whole universe can only function well as an orderly whole. The arguments he has been putting forward and this cosmic perspective provide the justification for the revolutionary view which provoked Callicles' entry into the discussion, that doing wrong is worse than suffering wrong. So again, the argument's going to sort of come full circle, and Socrates is once again going to reaffirm the idea that you're actually better off suffering wrong, so being the victim of crime, than you are doing wrong. Okay, so Callicles. I don't know what you're going on about, Socrates. You better find someone else to answer your questions. Our friend here can't stand people doing him good. In fact, he can't stand what we've been talking about, being disciplined. So this is Socrates saying that Callicles can't stand being disciplined. Actually, these arguments of yours don't interest me in the slightest, and I've only been answering your questions for Gorgias' sake. Well, what shall we do then? Are we going to break off in mid-discussion? That's up to you. So you can see here that Callicles has really given up. People say it's wrong to leave even stories unfinished, though. A story needs a head on it, they say, otherwise it goes around headless. So please help our discussion get ahead by answering the rest of my questions. You're a bully, Socrates. My advice to you would be to forget about the discussion, or at least find someone else to talk to. Any volunteers? No? Let's not leave the argument unfinished. Couldn't you complete the argument by yourself? Couldn't you just talk to yourself and answer your own questions? And then Socrates says, then I'd really have to be, as Epicharmus puts it, capable of saying all alone what it took two men to say before. By the looks of it, though, I don't have any choice in the matter. All right, let's do it that way. Once knowledge of what is and isn't true in these matters is out in the open, we'll all benefit equally. So I think we should all try to be the first to get there. I'll tell you how I think the argument goes on then, but it's up to you to challenge me and show me where I'm going wrong. If any of you get the impression that I'm failing to recognize mistakes in my own thinking, the point is, you see that I certainly don't speak as an expert with knowledge. Okay, so this is an interesting thing coming from Socrates here. And, we have to remember, arguably, Socrates' most famous quote is, "All that I know is that I know nothing." Um, he's freely admitting that he's not an expert in this matter, but he has thought about it and he's come to a conclusion that he feels like is correct. Remember at the start of the reading, he was so happy to have met someone like Callicles who was willing to challenge that, and he was hoping that he actually found someone who was more knowledgeable in how we should be living our lives. But as it turned out, just like everyone else that Socrates has conversations with in Plato's texts, these supposed experts like Callicles actually don't really know anything, and they're just pretend experts. As soon as you scratch the surface a little bit about what they supposedly know, it's very clear they don't know anything. So the point is, you see, that I certainly don't speak as an expert with knowledge. I look into things with your help. And this means that if someone disputes something I've been saying and seems to me to be making a good point, I'm the first to admit it. But there's no point in me saying all this unless you think we ought to finish the argument. If you don't want to carry on, let's leave it there and go home. So Socrates is sort of now putting the challenge out to the whole audience, and he's saying, okay, well, if I'm going to finish this conversation by myself, then please don't let me get away with saying something that you personally disagree with. If you think I make an error in the argument I'm about to present, I want you to stop me and I want you to correct me. Or, if you're not willing to do that, let's just go home. Okay, and now Gorgias steps in. Well, I, at any rate, don't think we ought to go home yet, Socrates. I'd like you to complete the argument, and I get the impression everyone else wants you to as well. In fact, for my part, I'd like to hear you round the argument off by yourself. My own personal preference, though, Gorgias, would have been for our friend Callicles to have gone on talking to me until I'd repaid him for Zethus' speech at Amphions. Anyway, even if you're not prepared to help me finish our discussion, Callicles, you must at least take me up on anything you hear from me which strikes you as incorrect. And if you do prove me wrong, I won't get cross with you as you did with me. No, I'll make sure the public register lists you as my greatest benefactor. In other words, if Callicles can convince Socrates that what he's saying is wrong, then Socrates will see him as completing the greater, or giving him the greatest gift that anyone possibly could have. Just get the discussion over with, Socrates. Here goes then, and this is where we get the review or the summary that's up on the screen now. I'll review the whole argument so far. Is the pleasant the same as the good? No, they're different. Callicles and I agreed on that. Should the good be the reason we do pleasant things, or the pleasant be the reason we do good things? The good should be the reason we do pleasant things. So a little bit like what we saw in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Socrates is arguing that the good should be the goal of our actions. Okay. Isn't the quality of being pleasant? Isn't it the quality of being pleasant which makes us enjoy things, and the quality of being good which makes us good? Yes. Now, what does it take to be a good human being? What does it take to be a good anything, in fact? It always takes a specific state of goodness, doesn't it? I don't see how we can deny that, Callicles. And whether we're talking about a good artifact, a good body, a good mind, for that matter, or a good creature, what it takes for these states of goodness to occur is in an ideal form is not chaos, but organization and perfection, and the particular branch of expertise whose province the object in question is. Right? I agree. So Socrates sort of agreeing with himself there, but this is that organization coming back into it again. So what is it to be a good human? That is to be organized in every way that you possibly can. Your body will be organized and you'll be healthy. Your mind will be organized and it will be disciplined. This idea of organization is really important. In every case, then, a good state is an organized and orderly state, isn't it? I'd say so. So a thing has to be informed by a particular orderly structure, the structure appropriate to it to be good, doesn't it? I think so. Doesn't it follow that a mind possessed of its proper structure is better than a disordered mind? It's bound to be. But a mind possessed of orderly structures is an orderly mind, isn't it? Well, naturally. And an orderly mind is a self-disciplined mind. Absolutely. So you see Socrates here, without someone arguing against him, he's able to just take this argument and run with it. And so by orderly mind, what he really means is the self-disciplined mind. So this is connecting to the things that he'd said earlier. From which it follows that a self-disciplined mind is a good mind. Now, I can't see anything wrong with this argument, Callicles, but if you can, please tell me what it is. Just get on with it, Socrates. All right. If a self-disciplined mind is good, then a mind in the opposite state is bad. In other words, an undisciplined and self-indulgent mind is bad. Yes. So this is the type of person that Callicles was advocating for earlier in the reading, the self-indulgent person. Now, a disciplined person must act in an appropriate manner towards both gods and his fellow human beings, because inappropriate behavior indicates lack of self-discipline. Yes, that's bound to be so. Well, when appropriate is used of the way we relate to our fellow human beings, it means just. And when it's applied to the way we relate to the gods, it means religious. And of course, anyone who acts justly and religiously is a just and religious person. True. Okay, so sorry, I probably should have skipped the slide over. What Socrates is now discussing is the application for his argument. So now that we know that a good person is a disciplined person and a disciplined mind, it's very hard for me to tell. Okay, I'm not a mind reader, so because mind readers don't exist, just to be clear. Okay, just they don't exist. They're not real. But anyway, I'm sure that I've ranted about that in class many times. But what Socrates is saying is, well, how do we know what this self-disciplined person looks like? What would they do? Okay, and so firstly, their organized mind would lead to them behaving in a certain way around other people, and they would treat people correctly. And what we mean by that is they would be just. And in terms of the gods and how would they treat the gods, well, they would treat them correctly, and we call this religious. Okay, and of course, anyone who acts justly and religiously is a just and religious person. True. Okay, so we're going to see Socrates basically building up an argument for the idea that self-discipline leads to you becoming the best possible person. And it's only through discipline that you are able to act justly and religiously. And you'll see him refer to these people as paradigms of goodness in a moment. Okay. He's also bound to have courage because a disciplined person doesn't choose inappropriate objects to seek out or avoid. No, he turns towards or away from events, people, pleasures, and irritations as and when he should, and steadily endures what he should endure. It follows, Callicles, that because a self-disciplined person is just, brave, and religious, as we've explained, he's a paradigm of goodness. So those three facets, justice, like a religious mindset, so honoring the gods, and also brave, makes this person a paradigm of goodness. Now, a good person is bound to do whatever he does well and successfully, and success brings fulfillment and happiness, whereas a bad man does badly and is therefore unhappy. Unhappiness, then, is the lot of someone who's the opposite of self-disciplined. In other words, the kind of self-indulgent person you were championing. So if we want to achieve happiness, Socrates is saying we must be a just and religious and brave person. How do we become a just, religious, and brave person? We must be a disciplined person. Okay? So really the path to happiness is through self-discipline, because you will turn towards and away from the things that are good for you in terms of turning towards them, and away from the things that are bad for you. Okay, that's my position, and I believe it to be true. If it really is true, it looks as though anyone who wants to be happy must seek out and practice self-discipline and beat as hasty a retreat as possible away from self-indulgence. The best course would be for him to see to it that he never has to be restrained. But if he or anyone close to him, whether that's an individual person or a whole community, does ever need it, then he must let justice and restraint be imposed, or else forfeit happiness. So, just to pause for a moment with that little section, you'll remember that during Callicles' rant, right at the start of the reading, Plato quite purposefully makes reference to Socrates' death and his trial. Callicles says that, if anyone were to ever bring you up on charges, even ones that were made up, you wouldn't be able to defend yourself. And this is a contemptible state to be in because you're powerless. What Socrates is saying here is the just person will do what is right, even if it costs them their lives. And if we think about Socrates' defense, when he was brought up on charges, he was very clear that he was saying that he was doing what he was doing for the good of Athens, for the good of the community. He didn't want to see his beloved city become stagnant. Okay, and he sort of referred to himself as a fly buzzing around the head of a sleeping donkey on a summer's day. The donkey doesn't want to get up and do any work. And this he compared to Athens. Athens had grown sort of decadent, and it had stopped progressing. And Socrates could see that everywhere. And so he saw it as his job to wake it up again and get it moving forward. This was one of the great cities. And so it had a duty to keep pushing forward. And so he, in terms of what we're seeing here, he bravely turns towards the job that he knows must be done. And he pushes Athens, excuse me, to try and wake itself up and to continue progressing. And it costs him his life. But this is not something that we should condemn him for, and this is not something we should look down upon him for, because as Socrates is arguing here, the self-disciplined person will be willing to do that sort of thing. Okay, they will turn towards things that are difficult in pursuit of the good, okay, for themselves and for the people around them, and even for the wider community. So, continuing on after our little segue into Socrates' death, I'll tell you what the ideal is that we should set ourselves to live by, in my opinion. We should devote all our own and our community's energies towards ensuring the presence of justice and self-discipline, and so guaranteeing happiness. That's what should guide our actions. We shouldn't refuse to restrain our desires, because that condemns us to a life of endlessly trying to satisfy them. And this is the life of a predatory outlaw, in the sense that anyone who lives like that will never be on good terms with anyone else, any other human being, let alone a god, since he's incapable of cooperation, and cooperation is a prerequisite for friendship. So basically, Socrates is saying, if you adopt the life that Callicles was suggesting, then it will be a slippery slope to becoming a criminal. Keep in mind, Socrates here is sort of, through implication at least, committing the slippery slope fallacy. He's saying, if you become self-indulgent, then eventually you'll become a criminal and have no friends. Well, does it really have to get to that extreme? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so remember, with this sort of fallacy, it doesn't mean that his argument is wrong, but it means that the presentation of the argument, it leaves us wanting more in terms of justification. Okay, so slippery slope fallacy being presented by Socrates there. But in fact, Callicles, the expert's opinion is that cooperation, love, order, discipline, and justice bind heaven and earth, gods and men. That's why they call the universe an ordered whole, my friend, rather than a disorderly mess or an unruly shambles. It seems to me that for all your expertise in the field, you're overlooking this point. You failed to notice how much power geometrical equality has among gods and men, and this neglect of geometry has led you to believe that one should try to gain a disproportionate share of things. So this is the point that I sort of said at the start of the video. We could attack or undermine now that we know so much more about the universe. The Greeks, they were the first astronomers, really, and they spent a lot of time identifying the order in the movement of the planets and the changing of the seasons and all of that sort of stuff. And when you look at things at a certain level in astronomy, the universe seems extraordinarily ordered. Okay. Um, Take the position of Earth. Earth is perfectly positioned far enough away from the sun so that we don't burn up, and not so far away so that we don't freeze. Okay, they call it the Goldilocks belt. This suggests some sort of order, like a mathematical precision that's present in the universe. Now, whilst you could argue this, the problem is we now know much more about the structure of the universe, and it doesn't follow a form of geometric order. There isn't a lot of mathematical precision in the universe. We have black holes swallowing entire universes. We have universes on a collision course with each other. Um, and so this idea that you know Socrates is justifying the order argument that something that's well ordered is always good. Part of the justification he's providing for that here is that the universe itself is ordered, and this suggests that the gods um, prioritize order over chaos. Well, now that we know a lot more about the universe is much more chaotic than it is ordered. Okay, now it's hardly a knockout blow, but it is something where you go, okay, well, this is a justification he's using. We should look at something like order and hold it up to high esteem because that's the way the gods created the universe. So there must be something really good in order. Well, they didn't actually. The universe is quite chaotic and much, much more chaotic than we can possibly imagine. So little problem for Socrates there with our better understanding of the universe today. There you are then. Now, either we have to prove this argument wrong by showing that happiness does not depend on a person having the attributes of justice and self-discipline, and unhappiness on immorality, or we have to accept that it's true and try and see what follows from it. All those earlier conclusions follow, Callicles, the ones you asked me if I was serious about when I claimed that we should denounce any wrongs committed not only by ourselves, but even by our family and friends, and that this is what rhetoric should be used for. Moreover, the point Polus conceded out of embarrassment, according to you, has turned out to be true, that doing wrong is more contemptible than suffering wrong. Precisely because it's worse than suffering wrong. And it's also true that for someone to be a genuine rhetorician, he does in fact have to be a moral person and to understand morality. And this, in its turn, was the point Polus and Gorgias conceded out of embarrassment. So just to paint the picture here, Socrates initially started the conversation with Gorgias, where he asked, would he teach morals to a student who presented to him and didn't have any understanding of morals? And he sort of bullies Gorgias into saying, well, yes, of course he would, because he would see it as his duty. And then Socrates pushes him to see if he's an expert on morality, and he's certainly not. And so Socrates sort of says, well, who are you then to teach someone else about morals? You don't know anything about it. Okay. But against this background, let's consider whether or not you were right to fault me for my inability to defend myself or any of my family and friends or rescue them from terrible danger. So basically, he's saying to Socrates, let's see if you were right and if I am a terrible person because I wouldn't be able to defend myself. You say that I'm as vulnerable as a person with no status at all to anybody's passing inclination, to smash them in the face, to use your forceful expression, confiscate my property, send me into exile, or even, if worst comes to worst, kill me. And according to you, there is nothing more contemptible than being at the mercy of people like this. Well, I've already stated my view more than once, but there's no harm in repeating it. I deny that being wrongly smashed in the face or stabbed or robbed by a cut purse is the most contemptible thing that can happen to a person, Callicles. I claim that it's more contemptible and worse as well to hit and cut me and my property without just cause, and I also claim that to steal, enslave, burgle, and in short, to do any kind of wrong against me and my property is not only worse for the wrongdoer than it is for me, the target of the wrongdoing, but it is also more contemptible. So Socrates kind of arguing 2 points here, just to be clear. He's saying that if you commit crime, not only are you worse than the person who was the victim of your crime, okay, but society also sees you as being worse. This is what we mean by contemptible, remember. People are going to look down on you. No one is going to hold you up as a good example of a person. All right? They're going to hold you in contempt. Um, so, yeah, just be clear about the 2 points there. So it's bad for you because it creates an immoral soul, and it's also bad because the rest of society will look down upon you and shun you. This is sort of the losing friends idea. As I say, these are the conclusions we reached before in an earlier phase of the discussion, and they're securely tied down, if you'll pardon the rather extravagant expression, by arguments of iron and adamant. That's how it seems to me in any case, and unless you untie these bonds, actually, it might call for someone younger and more forceful than you. Anyone whose opinion differs from the one I'm proposing at the moment cannot fail to be wrong. All I'm saying is what I always say. I myself don't know the facts of these matters, but I've never met anyone, including the people here today, who could disagree with what I'm saying and still avoid making himself ridiculous. Anyway, I suggest that the facts are as I've said. If so, if the worst thing for a criminal is to commit crimes, except that if you could have a worse than worst, it would be worse for him not to be punished for the wrong he does, then what kind of defense would it really be ridiculous of a person to be incapable of providing for himself? It would have to be the inability to avert what does us the most harm, wouldn't it? It has to be a person's failure to provide that kind of defense for himself, his family, and his friends, which is most contemptible, hasn't it? And then the second most contemptible failure is failure to defend oneself against what does us the second most harm. And the third most contemptible is failure in respect of what does us the third most harm. And so on and so forth on the same principle that it's the amount of harm a thing does which determines how admirable the ability to defend oneself against it is, and how contemptible the inability is. Am I right, Callicles, or not? You're right. Okay, so an apt way to finish the reading, but just to clarify what Callicles is, or what Socrates rather is saying here, um, uh, he's saying that, well, let's think about, is it really the worst condition to be in to not be able to defend myself from an unjust action that's taken against me? And if I think about it, well, he says right at the start of the reading, the worst condition to be in is existing with an immoral soul. That is the worst condition to be in. Okay. And so it doesn't matter if I can't defend myself from an unjust action that's taken against me in the courts, because in the grand scheme of things, the person isn't doing any harm to me. They're not affecting my ability to be a good, disciplined, brave, just person. Okay. And it doesn't matter that I can't defend myself from it, because that person who's doing that is actually putting themselves into the worst state possible, because they're lying to bring someone up on charges that aren't correct. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. All right, and hopefully you've enjoyed Plato's Gorgias. Um, Next up is Nietzsche, who's always good fun, very fiery. We're going to see a similar argument, actually, that Callicles presented, but done much, much better by Nietzsche. As always, like and subscribe. And as one of my wonderful followers or subscribers sent me, thank you, Lara. Don't be afraid to create a few false accounts and subscribe to the channel to really make sure you're getting the most out of it. So thank you very much for that. I hope everyone's having a good day. I'll see you in class, and happy philosophizing. Bye.